Indicted Fiction, the most untrue... Oh, wait, this is just a behind-the-scenes episode. Hi, I'm Alyanna Poe, the creator and voice of Abigail Drummer. Today I'm going to answer a few questions about the podcast, Adam's Murder, and give you an idea of what was going on behind the scenes of Indicted Fiction, Season 1, Adam's Murder. Why did I want to create a podcast? I have a YouTube channel, and for a while I was reading Edgar Allan Poe's poetry as well as my own. One of my subscribers suggested starting a podcast because they liked my voice, something I never thought someone would say. So I thought about it for a few months. Then I watched Only Murders in the Building. I saw how crazy people got about podcasts, having maps, and eagerly waiting for the next episode. I thought, why shouldn't I do that? And I got to work thinking about an idea. True crime is popular but requires a lot of research. I wanted to write something fictional but not a fictional true crime case. I didn't want to present evidence and go through the crime like an actual true crime podcast because I knew people would blow holes right through my story. I needed a narrative and it needed to be compelling. Why did I write Adam's Murder? The idea of a girl hunting for her brother's killer would not leave me alone. I felt guilty and like I would be profiting off of something horrible that happened, so I tried to think of other ideas. It didn't work. My half-brother committed suicide in 2020. I wasn't close to him or raised with him, but it was still shocking. Due to the way the news was delivered, my parents and I were unsure if it was a suicide or a murder when we were first told. The idea of him being murdered was horrific, but the truth of him committing suicide was heartbreaking. Writing Adam's Murder was cathartic. For a year, I lived with grief, guilt, and anger. I cried almost every time I opened the doc to work on this manuscript. I even cried while recording some of the episodes. Some of the things Abigail says to and about her brother are true, such as this excerpt from a letter she wrote to him. Most of all, I miss the idea that someday we might be close, that someday I would be an aunt and you would be an uncle, and we could pretend our childhood meant nothing and be a family. My brother had a young son. I think about him a lot and how I'll never get to be an aunt. I think that's why I gave Abigail that hope of knowing her brother's child. Abigail says she wishes it was her in the ground often because I lived with guilt for a long time. My family situation wasn't my fault, but my brother had blamed me for things that had happened when I was an infant and a child. In the place of dedication in the book form of Adam's Murder, I did not put my brother's name. He wasn't an entirely good person to me, and I don't think he'd want his name there anyway. I dedicated the book to my grief. The book was written to express how I feel, not to commemorate his memory. Why address addiction and homelessness? Some of my extended family, including my brother, were and are addicts. As a child, I watched one of my family members destroy themselves through drugs. Similarly to my brother, he's been in and out of prison my entire life. It was hard and confusing to watch someone do that to themselves. As Abigail says, you want to help, but you can't say the wrong things unless you want to be called controlling or a bad person. I wrote Abigail as the confused sister that didn't understand the addiction because that's how I've always felt. We gave this person chance after chance at life, giving them food, a place to stay, and a job, but somehow they keep picking the drugs over us. I wasn't close enough to my brother to give him the same chances, but would it have done any good? My parents were and are always there to protect me and talk me through things, but there's still that feeling of guilt. Guilt that I didn't know my brother better. Guilt that I wasn't there for him. Guilt that the last time we talked ended so poorly. Addiction affects more than those that are addicted. It affects everyone around them, especially those young eyes that are scared and confused. In my area, all of Hearst, California, there are a lot of homeless addicts and homeless veterans. I wish more was being done for them. Instead, lawmakers just legalize homelessness and chase them around. Tent encampments are set up all over town and it's disgusting. It may be an ugly sight for most that pass by, but I know the people in those encampments need help and nothing is being done. For every signed copy of Adam's Murder I sell, I'll be donating $3 to a local rehabilitation center. I try to do what I can in my community, and I'm hoping one day that my writing will turn enough profit so I can start my own charities and donate to the ones that really make a difference. A forged mask that communicates with the dead. A cable repairman called to investigate an empty field, or so he thinks. A father-son DIY project not quite working as intended. An excavation going horribly awry. And a blacksmith called to do the bidding of an old god. An unfortunate series of events, indeed. These infernal souls and many others are all part of The Fear Forge, the first edition of Horror Smith Publishing's debut anthology series. It features tales told of cursed smelters, haunted crafted objects, and the degradation of relationships forged within the fires of vengeance. For these authors, fear has forged with the mundane, turning simple rings, rockers, and candles into ravenous blacksmiths of destiny that have doomed us all. Get Fear Forge on Amazon. Some fun facts about Adam's Murder. Star Bend is a real place in Olivehurst, California. You can look it up on Google Maps and see it actually looks how I described it. It's always been a weird, creepy place for me, which is why I thought it was the perfect place to set up a dumping ground for bodies. I tried to set up the story as accurately as possible to the real Olivehurst. I actually live in Plumas Lake, which shares a zip code with Olivehurst, but when I was a sheriff's cadet, I spent most of my time in Olivehurst. I used similar names of businesses that are already there to keep familiarity for those that know the area. The apartment complex she lives in isn't quite in the same place I put it, and it hasn't even been completed as far as I know. My absolute favorite scene is in episode 3 when Abigail drops the cat into the grave and it's crushed to death by the coffin. I can't think about that scene without laughing. It's so fucking bizarre and ridiculous, but also heartbreaking. You can say that I have a fucked up sense of humor. I named the character Abigail because when I was a teenager, I met a boy that lived down the street via some kids I already knew. The next day when he came over to say hi, he said, "Hi, Abigail," and I was like, who the fuck is Abigail? Like, that's not even remotely close to my name. Why did I name it Indicted Fiction? Well, this is embarrassing. I wanted to name the podcast the Untrue Crime Podcast, but that already exists. So I thought, well, indicted and fiction rhyme, right? Because in my head, I was saying the C. I was saying indicted. Indicted. So yeah, Indicted Fiction sure does sound a little rhymey, right? I was on Instagram the night before I was to record the very first episode, and one of Big Tug's videos came on. If you don't follow him, you should, and the video starts with words that don't sound like how they're spelled. The first word is indicted, and I'm like, what? No one told me this. So thank goodness for him, or the first episode would have been so fucking embarrassing. How did I record the podcast? I had an $80 mic from Amazon that I used for my YouTube videos, and let me tell you, I need something better for season 2. It has a hissing in the background and just... So to start off, I set up a music stand with my tablet. I use my tablet so I can scroll without making noise. I have this mic stand I got from the thrift store for like $4, and it screws to my desk. I love it. I connect the mic to my desktop via USB, which isn't great for sound. I'd like to get a mic with an audio interface, but that costs money. I use Audacity to record and to edit. It's free and has worked for my needs. I followed one YouTube video religiously to edit this season to ensure I got the same sound throughout. To prevent noise, I shut off my fan, close my blinds and curtains, and throw pillows on the door. I'm a 21-year-old who writes for a living and lives with her parents. I don't have money for a professional studio. I usually warm up with deep breaths and repeating the opening. Indicted Fiction, the most untrue crime podcast out there, etc., etc. I have to get my giggles out sometimes because, man, I'll get laughing about something and I can't stop. I always have water on hand because dry mouth, and I stand while recording because asthma. I fuck up a lot while recording, so a 15 to 19 minute episode usually takes 30 minutes. I take a lot of long pauses to catch my breath or drink water, simply because sometimes I feel like I've run a marathon after a long sentence. Again, asthma sucks, and I'm sure you guys don't want to listen to the whole fucking time. But yeah, I don't have a fancy setup, just a girl winging it. This was the first project I've ever edited audio, and not going to lie, I'm pretty impressed with my skills so far. What did I learn from season 1? Other than things about myself, I learned that even when you're giving something away for free, it's hard to get people to take it. In the indie book world, there is constantly someone out there with a free book to be downloaded, so how do you compete? I thought that having an audiobook for free on podcast platforms would be a breakout hit, but so far it hasn't gained me a huge audience. I've connected with my readers in a new way, which I'm thankful for, but I was really hoping to gain new readers and interest this way. As with all my projects, I've always winged things. I didn't know anything about self-publishing a month before I self-published Eden, but there it is on Amazon. Just remember that YouTube and Google exist. Even Reddit has some good nooks to learn in. Winging it isn't always a bad thing. I also learned that the podcast world is just as congested as the indie book world. There's a lot of voices out there, and finding a place for yourself and your voice can be hard. It's difficult to obtain an audience, but it's not impossible. I hope you've enjoyed listening to Indicted Fiction as much as I've enjoyed creating it. I have ideas for season 2, even season 3, and even a season 4. Each will be different, but still from the first person point of view of a woman. I don't want to just narrate a story, I want to be in it, to immerse the listener into it. I look forward to writing these narratives and voicing them for this podcast. If you'd like to support my future efforts and get a sneak peek at what I'm working on, please consider supporting me on Patreon. November of 2022, I will be having a special writing event where I write my entire next novel in November and post my daily word count for my patrons to read. If you're hearing this later than November 2022, the unedited book will still be there for you to read for only $1 per month. If you'd like to read more of my books or get a copy of Adam's Murder, all of my books are available on Amazon. and signed copies are available for purchase on my website. You can get my titles Eaten, Void, Cradles the Brain, Rejects, and Adam's Murder all on Amazon. My next novel, titled Mukbang, should be published on Christmas of 2022 after its writing event on Patreon. Thank you for all your support. It goes back into more creations.